If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Long haul truckers, what's the creepiest / most paranormal thing you've seen on the road at night? My dad drove truck during the 1970s oil embargo. One night he broke down in rural Pennsylvania. He had to walk down the highway a couple miles back to a restaurant to use the phone and call dispatch. After the phone call, he walked back to the truck. There was no moon, and because of the oil embargo, the highway was deserted. From the tree line on the side of the highway came the crack of an enormous tree branch breaking, and then some movement. My dad stopped and called out. He thought it might be someone fooling around, or a hunter in the woods, odd as that would be at that time of night. No answer came from the trees, and my dad continued toward his busted rig. But all the way to the truck he was sure he heard something following him from the trees, matching his own footsteps. He locked himself in the truck and waited, uneventfully, until help arrived. Another night, again in 1970s Pennsylvania, in the mountains, a strange figure ran in front of my dad's truck. It looked to my dad, who had not heard of Bigfoot yet, that it was a man in a gorilla costume. When he arrived at his destination, he told some of the men working there what he had seen, and asked if any of them had seen a guy in a gorilla costume running around in the mountain roads. They thought my dad was nuts. Those are my dad's two experiences with what he believes was Bigfoot. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He is the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story he had goosebumps and a concerned expression. Which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and shit-stained pants. I'll tell this story in the first person as he told it to me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I am on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of bumfuck nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy's taking the antlers as a trophy, or he's fucking sick. As I got closer still, I can now see that this guy's eating the fucking deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. It stands up, and that's when I see that it's fucking huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, well fuck. This thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed and I'm about to the point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me, again not at the truck, it's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete. Old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is fucking giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares the shit out of me. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 yo. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24, 36 hours, or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod jerk thing, which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60+ mph, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, "I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today," and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual. This isn't my story but an old friend of mine's. In the 90s, John was an IT guy in parts of eastern Iowa and far west Illinois. He was used to driving from one account to another either late at night or early in the morning. He'd pick a halfway point to use a rest stop and he'd grab one of those awful paper cup coffees from the machines while he was there. One early morning about 4:30 a.m. he was in Iowa and he stopped at a wide spot in the road rest stop. He parked and there weren't any other people there except for a couple of semis who looked like they had been there for quite a while. He went into the men's room and it was deserted. He used the bathroom and went to the sink to wash his hands. He said he caught some movement from the corner of his eye and there was a very tall, very thin man standing right in the middle of the entrance about 15 feet away. He was dressed all in black and he says that the guy's eyes were pitch black. The man was giggling to himself and John swore he was at least 8 feet tall. He glanced down to grab a paper towel from the machine and when he looks up, this man is so close he can hear him breathing with a loud bubbly sound. There's no way he could have crossed 15 feet in 1 second. As he told it, this thing slowly smiled at him and it wasn't a smile. It was a bearing of serrated, sharp teeth and this thing starts chuckling like he's looking at a 3-piece KFC meal. My friend screams, "Jesus help me," and runs for his car. My friend says the thing is startled, like he wasn't supposed to be able to move. He felt like he should have been frozen, like staring at a snake. He runs to his car, which wasn't locked, slams the locks down, starts the car and floors it getting out of there. As he's leaving he looks in the rear view and this thing is running after the car. He always swore somehow this thing followed him home. He was paralyzed in an accident not long after and I went to care for him for a little while. I brought my 4-year-old son with me and in his typical baby way, he would chatter away while the two of us were talking. I asked him one day who he was talking to. My son said he says his name is Biter. He has long teeth and he lives with Mr. John. I grabbed my son and ran out of there. I never went back to that house. Okay, so here's a spook for you, and to this day I still have no idea WTF. So I was in the VA/MD area, and had a lot of work-related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up, and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of VA, got dragged off to other places even further out, the usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my, thankfully late afternoon, Monday. I'm fully rested, I didn't do any drinking, I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 a.m., in the middle of bumfuck nowhere between Roanoke and DC, absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour, no tail lights either. No road lamps either. It's dark, it's mildly damp, it's foggy. I have the music up, I'm feeling good, all is fine. And then I just happen to look to the left and there's a fucking dog barking at me. A German Shepherd, in a car passenger's seat, somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to its window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it, too, because at first my brain is not registering cop car, dummy. I'm doing 90 plus in a 75, I promptly have the oh shit moment when the dog, the instruments, the white crown Vic/light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down hard but safe, to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over because. Wait. There is no shoulder on the left side of this road. I look back to my left, where there is still no shoulder/room for another car, and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the fucking highway, flipped on all my light bars and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No tail lights, no headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I can see for a nice long distance both ways, too. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility, and a lot of extra lighting, off-road SUV with the trimmings, There is no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet sloped grass and rocks on my left side. My dad has several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is from actually just in his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled off at the next diner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. The creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down steep grade and said all of the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer it jumped down and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound it leapt down and then leapt over to the other side of the embankment. At the time he thought it was a Sasquatch, now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountain. Not a trucker, but I've driven cross country a few times. Have two freaky things that have happened. First, middle of the night with a buddy and we pulled off to the side of the highway to take a piss and switch drivers. Nobody else around on the road. I walk to the side, pitch black, whip it out and start to pee. My buddy is just stretching his back or whatever. I heard something in the woods shake a tree. No other way to describe it, a tree about 30 feet away shook. Then I hear something big crashing through the woods coming straight for us and the car. My buddy and I don't even say anything, he dives in the driver's side and I jump through the passenger window, pants still down. He floors it out of there, legs and pants dangling outside. Never did see anything in the rear view mirror, but there was something out there coming at us. My buddy likes to say he heard me stop peeing when that tree shook. Second, I was solo somewhere in West Virginia, again middle of the night. I got off an exit, one of those long curvy ones. I saw lights before I got off and assumed it was exit stuff, or maybe even construction. Get to the exit and it's not construction, it's a ton of Army or National Guard guys. The exit was lit up brighter than daytime, so many lights set up pointing everywhere. The Army guys were completely decked out, gas masks on and assault rifles. They were sprinting around. One guy at the corner was frantically waving me through to get back on the highway. I gunned it out of there. Looked in the news later and didn't see anything, no idea what was going on that night. When I was a kid I grew up in the cab of my father's truck. He was a single father and I was on the road with him quite a bit. Occasionally if he was going to pass near my grandmother's house he would drop me off there for a week or so, I'm sure to give himself a break from a very young son in a very tight space. One time when he was nearing my grandmother's house I remember crying because I didn't want him to drop me off. I loved my grandmother very much but I was attached to my father for some reason. Separation anxiety I'm sure, thanks Mom. As I was sobbing I started recognizing my surroundings and knew we were close. I decided the next song on the radio was going to be Dad's song, so every time I heard it I would think of him. I guess that's why they call it The Blues by Elton John came on the radio, so that chipper tune became the song I used to remember him. That was in the early 80s and I can't remember hearing that song over the last 20 plus years. 3 years ago I was driving to see my dad in the hospital and I stopped at a truck stop for gas and snacks. What song should start playing over the truck stop speakers, but I guess that's why they call it the blues. I got a sick nervous feeling. Was this a good omen or bad one? I'm not superstitious so I tried to dismiss it and chalked it up to chance. April 11th will be 3 years since I lost him. Surely it was just a random occurrence that I would hear that song going to see him for the last time, right? I'm not superstitious or religious, but I sure would like to see the old man again someday. Not a truck driver, but I've crossed the states many times in my career. I used to tour manage a band that consisted of 4 musicians and 2 crew, so it was a total of 7 of us. We would often drive a white Sprinter van with a U-Haul trailer on the back, and if you're familiar with U-Haul you know they have different pictures on the sides of them, often a state and something significant from that state painted on the side. We were about an hour outside of Roswell, New Mexico at 2 a.m. It was in the summer. We were coming from having just played the New Mexico State Fair. In every direction around us it was pitch black, no lights from cities or even rest stops, no other cars, nothing. We have absolutely no phone signal. All of our phones say no signal at the same time. It's a 2-lane highway, the only illumination coming from our headlights. We haven't seen another car for a very long time. Suddenly on the horizon we see a light appear directly ahead of us. We keep driving normally, and the light is approaching us quickly. We, rightly, just assume it's another car coming our way on the other side of the highway, but then as the vehicle goes to pass us, It's a white Sprinter van towing a U-Haul trailer with the exact same state artwork as ours on the side. Same tires. Same model van. Same trailer. Same everything. And as soon as we pass it, it's gone. All of us very uncomfortably said the same thing at the same time. Did that van have the same? What are the chances? I'll never forget it. We couldn't do anything but just uncomfortably acknowledge we all saw the same thing and none of us were losing our minds. My dad has told me this story a couple times and each time it always kind of weirds me out. He is not a trucker, but when he was in the military one night him and a buddy went out to get food. About halfway into their drive down a dark road my dad and his buddy noticed a woman in a red dress with black hair walking. My dad and his buddy found it odd because it didn't seem safe and it wasn't that warm. My dad said deep down he knew stopping was a bad idea and so they drove by a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. As they drove by my dad and his friend both swear she has no face. Instead there was just a black hole as if she had been in a wreck and her face was taken off. It freaked them both out so badly my dad floored it and when they stopped to eat both of them agreed they saw the same thing. Come to find out a woman had been killed earlier that year in an accident. They were talking about it when a stranger told them the sightings of the woman were actually common. I am not one to believe in the paranormal but the story is still kind of weird. Story time. This isn't something we saw but experienced. My dad was a trucker and in the summers I tagged along with him. One evening we were driving from Houston to Jacksonville and somehow we got turned around on the back roads of Louisiana. The last major place I remembered us being in was Troy at about 1 a.m. Well, it was almost 3 and we had no idea where we were. We eventually came to this little bitty town. It had one broken stoplight, a diner, an abandoned factory, and some empty shopping centers. In total it was maybe 4 blocks from one end to the other. We were both hungry and because we didn't want to wait to go to a truck stop, we pulled in behind the diner. Now that I think about it, the fact that a small town diner was open at 3 a.m. should have been a sign that something was amiss. We get in and this diner is pretty nice actually. A bit old school, reminiscent of the 60s. There's a single waitress on duty and a cop eating in a booth. We naturally all got to chatting. I remember that meal so clearly because it was the first time I had grits. They were loaded with cheese and bacon. The cop gave us directions back to the highway and bought me a chocolate milk for the road. I even remember the tables. They were composite wood covered in polka dot contact paper. Well, we eventually made it to civilization and later that morning at a stop my dad asks about the town. Cue a lot of confused local truckers. He was sure he was getting the name right but no one had heard of it. A few months later he was driving me back home to Texas and he drove through Louisiana attempting to find the town. We never could. We're still not sure what happened, if we drove through a ghost town no one remembered or something weirder. But I remember that night clearly. I'm not a long-haul trucker by trade, but back in the day I had several odd jobs that required I drive across the country. One was shipping horses, I drove the truck from barns to shows or vice versa, and the other was working as road crew for a rock band. I was very, very young. 16 to 20 years old. For reference, I'm female, short, athletic. Deaf the odd one are at a lot of rest stops and gas stations along the major routes. I also was tattooed and had a red mohawk which made me stand out more. Several weird things happened that I remember. But first I want to say, Navajo Nation is indeed really, really creepy. Always drove through at night too, never meant to plan that way but that's always how it happened. Other creepy place is northern Utah. Totally hills have eyes up there. Anyways, here's story 1. I was driving from Galveston, TX to New Orleans, Louisiana. Galveston had just been hit by the hurricane, and there was a weird serial killer moving through that city, so the vibe had already begun as weird. Just as I crossed the border from TX to LA, I started to get super tired. Was really late, 3 a.m.-ish. Tried to find a gas station to pull over, rest, and fill up, but all of them were closed. Gave up, pulled into the next one which was closed, parked in the far corner of the lot, killed my car, a convertible Jeep at the time, and laid my seat back to sleep. Everything seemed quiet. There were a few lights from the station that were on 24/7, but I parked far enough away they couldn't really bother my eyes. I woke up with a start. Had been dreaming but I had this like gut instinct to wake up. I immediately saw someone covered in mud, wearing rags, holding a knife, advancing slowly towards my car. He was maybe 5 feet away, moving forward. My adrenaline kicked in immediately, and I switched the car on. At that point he lets out some guttural growl and launches towards the car, as I'm backing up. I barely miss him as he's grabbing at the vehicle. With the headlights on, I could see he was covered in sores and the knife was all rusty. I sped out of there, didn't sleep again all the way to NOLA. Freaked me out so badly. I also never again slept in my car. The idea he could have been watching me sleep for who knows how long freaked me out. My car was also a convertible. He could have easily cut his way in. That image of waking up to some crazy person advancing on me with a knife has also given me nightmares for many years. Second story, I was hauling horses from Kansas to Tucson, Arizona. Driving a big Ford truck, a dually, with a small trailer carrying 3 horses. Near Gallup, around 2 a.m., the back inner tire on the passenger side blows out. I pulled off the road and assessed the situation. There was zero chance I could change the tire myself given the trailer, dually truck situation. And I'm tired and weak from exhaustion. So I call a tow company and try to find a temporary boarding place for the horses. It's the morning of Easter Sunday. Literally no one is open. I'm going through the yellow pages calling tow company after tow company. Yes, I'm old, this is pre-smartphones. Finally I find a Native American tow company who also has a ranch with boarding for the horses and a truck to come grab the trailer. Was a godsend. But the guy and his wife, who ran the company, told me to be very careful not to leave my truck during the 2 hours drive it would take for them to arrive. They said this in such an emphatic way I began to get really scared. They told me not to open the door for anyone and to keep the doors locked. No one was really on the road, so I was confused as to who could really be a threat out there. But I took them seriously and locked my doors and waited. I kept hearing this weird scratching sound on the back panel window of the truck. Like someone was trying to open the small window back there. A couple times the truck would sway, which I figured was the horses. It was pitch black out. No wind. I heard a few footsteps but chalked it up to the wind or my imagination. Was getting scared out there alone, unable to move. Eventually the nice couple with the tow truck and other truck to haul the ponies show up. They immediately and first move me from my cabin to the cabin of their tow truck. Tell me not to move or open the door under any circumstances. The couple is super fast, lady deals with the horses, man gets my truck up on the tow bed. They then drive me to their ranch, after the man drops my truck off at a local shop owned by his cousin who he says will handle the flat on Monday. Anyways, long story short, this wonderful couple takes care of me and the horses, gets my truck tire fixed. As I'm ready to leave on Monday afternoon, there's a story on the local news of a woman with a flat tire who was murdered alongside the same stretch of highway on Sunday evening. She'd been out changing a tire and looks like someone murdered her. I asked the couple and they didn't say much other than to never ever get out of the car at night along this highway, ever. Said it was certain death. They also gave me some bags of potpourri stuff to have, burn in my truck cabin for protection. I felt very lucky to find these nice PPL TBH. They def looked out for me and never once did I feel unsafe staying at their house. I was 18 at the time and def knew nothing about safety along trucking routes. But from now on I drive through that area and I don't stop if I can avoid it. Load up on gas, check tires in Flagstaff and ride on through to Albuquerque. There's weird stuff out there on the reservations and I don't pretend to know, or want to know what it is. A few months back I was taking a race hauler back east from California. I was on I-10 in New Mexico. I got tired and decided to stop on an off-ramp. In parts of New Mexico there are off-ramps that are literally nothing more than an off and on ramp. No roads to take when you exit, they typically have wide shoulders and I didn't consider it an unsafe place to stop. When I took the exit there was a small travel trailer pulled over and it appeared the driver was getting some sleep, so I felt better not really being the only one in the middle of nowhere. I slept for 3 or 4 hours and woke up. It was still very dark out and cold. I looked in my mirror and noticed the camper was gone. I don't remember how long I sat there, maybe a few minutes, and then looked in my mirror again and noticed a vehicle very close to the rear of my trailer, no lights on. Honestly, I saw the silhouette and thought it was a cop, didn't think much of it, figured he was taking a break or maybe even running my plates as the rig I had was expensive and quite commonly stolen. A few more minutes passed and I saw the headlights flash. Unsure of what was happening, I turned on the truck and prepared to get the hell out of there. The headlights flashed quickly 2 more times and then I heard a door slam. An older Chevy Silverado took off past me and crossed over the highway and headed west on 10. I waited about 5 minutes and after turning on all the exterior lights I walked around the truck. The best I can tell they were planning to siphon diesel out of my tanks. The cap was off the right side tank, and also the side entry door had pry marks near the latch. Still freaks me out a bit and I'm more careful of where I stop these days. I'm not a trucker but I'm a territory manager and my territory goes from New Mexico to Alabama and up to Kansas. So, it's not uncommon for me to have to drive from Dallas, Texas to Albuquerque, New Mexico and then from Albuquerque to Montgomery, Alabama and then back to Dallas all in 1 week. I've got a couple I work for a premium off-road lighting company, so we work in the deserts at night a lot, usually with trophy truck and Ultra 4 race teams. Last year I was coming home from King of the Hammers and it was about 4:30 a.m. and I was on a state highway through the desert in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven it, you're basically as far away from anything out in the desert as you can possibly be. Impossibly straight one-lane highways that stretch from hundreds of miles. I was awake and alert even though it was so late, and I was totally alone on the road and had been for hours. Suddenly, without warning while I was trucking along going about 80 miles per hour, the most insanely bright light came on right off my tailgate. It was so bright it lit up everything in the cab and was so blinding. I thought one of our race teams had snuck up behind me or something and turned on their light bars to screw with me. I drive a wrapped and branded, distinct show truck, so it happens a lot. The light stayed on my ass for a good 30 seconds, and would stay right on my ass even when I'd swerve a bit or when I moved onto the shoulder a bit to see if they would pass. It was weird, it was like the light was bolted to the back of my truck or something. After about 30 seconds I had enough, so I flipped on my rear-facing lights to give them a taste of their own medicine, and instantly the light behind me went off and there was nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Even though I was kind of blinded, I have some really powerful backup lights and they came on the second the other light went out, so there is no way whatsoever another vehicle was behind me, and there was just wide open flat desert all around, so it's not like they could have pulled off and hidden and I would have seen them anyways. Just nothing. I was totally freaked out, but I'm not an easy scare and very comfortable with being in the desert alone at night, so I pulled over, grabbed my knife and my flashlight and had a look around. I shone my flashlight all around and even used some of my portable hyper spots. Again, I work for a lighting company and always carry around tons of demo lights, to look all around me for anything, and then there was nothing. No cars, no trucks, aircraft, UFOs, nothing at all except wide open, empty New Mexico desert. My truck was totally fine, but I know I wasn't just seeing things because the back of my truck was hot, like way hotter than normal. All the metal on the bedsides and tailgate was almost uncomfortable to the touch. I've never figured it out. The only logical possibility I can think of is I've read about ball lightning before and apparently it's attracted to metal objects. Not a long-haul trucker, but once a newspaper deliver person in rural Georgia. I usually drove my route between 2-4 a.m. down all sorts of dirt roads, rallycross style, flinging papers along the way. It was mostly fun, and I had some neat interactions with rabbits sometimes racing me on the road, and near missing owls. However, I was always at least partly creeped out for the entire ride with the completely unrealistic and supernatural fear that I was never really driving alone. Always afraid that at some point, something from the back seat would come out of the darkness and whisper in my ear. Anyways, getting to the most notable creepy part. I only ever saw people 3 times on my route. Once when I drove up on a wreck, another when someone ran me off the road, and a third. There was one road I always drove down the fastest because it was the creepiest. No lights. No houses. Just long fences down a perfectly straight road that was hypnotically long. The only interruption in scene that my headlights could shine light on along the way was an old-style barn with hay loft and second-story soar for the loft. I never wanted to look at it, but ended up glancing at it every night as I drove by. Always the same. Tall, creepy, old, leaning, door locked, moving shadows, gone. One night, as I was approaching, I noticed the door swinging out, open. Of course, I had to look this time. As I drove past, I glimpsed a pale person in a nightgown standing in the doorway. I actually slammed on brakes and reversed, wondering if what I saw was real. The person or apparition was gone, and I never saw the door open again for as long as I drove the route. My older brother was driving me and my sister back from our biological parents' house back to our foster parents. They live a few cities away, so a long drive with lots of stops. We pulled into a gas station, and when we got out, for snacks, bathroom, etc., everything felt surreal. Like, as soon as we got out of the car we didn't hear anything, no people, no cars, nothing, it was dead silent. We went inside and looked around for a bit before choosing some snacks. My sister went out for the bathroom, and when she came back she tugged on my brother's jacket and said, "We have to go." My brother, obviously confused, "What? Hold on, I need to pay," and my sister just pulls him away, causing him to drop everything. He kinda got mad and pulled away, but when he turned around she was out the door and sprinting towards the car. Me and my brother looked confused at each other. We agreed I would follow her and see if she was okay. From what she told me, she was definitely not. We've both seen some weird things before and are both understandably very weary of things around us. She told me that when going to the bathroom she heard loud, scratching footsteps, like someone was dragging their feet with boots on. She ran into the bathroom, locked the door and did her business. As she was about to open the door, she felt scared all of a sudden, and instead of opening it, she put her ear on the door and listened. There it was again, the dragging feet, and this time some huffing. She stayed in the bathroom until it stopped. She slightly opened the door, and seeing nothing, she bolted to the storefront and tried dragging us out. I decided I would help calm her down by bringing her to the bathroom and showing her no one was there. We got out the car and I noticed my brother was paying, so we made it quick. We walked over near the bathrooms and I looked around. When I looked around the side of the building, I saw a small switchblade knife just on the dirt. It was opened and I could see the blade. It was shiny enough that I could see it clearly because of the back door light. I've never backpedaled so hard. We ran back to the car, my brother in tow. I didn't tell her what I saw until a few days later when she asked again. I was scared I would freak her out, so I didn't say anything immediately. Scariest thing that's happened to me and my sister up to date. We've had freaky things, but I think that was the first time it might have been a real person. I actually haven't told anyone this because I think I imagined it, but I've been having nightmares about this, so I guess I need to get it off my chest. I was hauling lumber on 36E between Fortuna, California and Red Bluff, California, on my way to the 5S. This was in 95 or 96, right before the coastal lumber industry folded. Route 36 is basically a glorified logging road. It twists through the mountain ranges and goes to one lane several times. Anyway, I got a late start, which was okay, as I like driving at night anyway. It was probably around 10 or 11 at night. As I crept up into the mountains, there was a nasty bit of fog. I rounded a corner, and suddenly there were all these deer just standing in the middle of the road, in the fog. It was kind of creepy, just seeing all these deer standing in the fog, in the middle of the road. I'm used to seeing them running across the road, not standing. I blew my horn, and they all turned and looked into my headlights, their ears twitching, the buck's antlers casting long twisted shadows into the fog. I blew my horn again, and they lazily walked to the side of the road. I idled forward between them. I looked out my driver window and saw the bucks and does warily looking back at me as I drove through them. But that wasn't the creepy part. I reached the peak and started back down. The fog on the eastern side abated. But as I rounded a corner, I saw a guy walking down the road, down the middle of the oncoming lane, his back to me. He had shoulder-length black hair, wet and stringy from the moisture that had been in the air. He wore a faded blue wool-lined jean jacket, hands in pockets, and darker jean pants. When my lights hit him, he swerved toward the shoulder of the other lane, giving me room. Then the most horrifying thing happened. I was going maybe 25 or 30 at this point, but as I came up to him, he suddenly bolted right in front of my truck. The last thing I saw was his wide black eyes and his mouth open in a silent yell, a black pit in his white face shining in my headlights before disappearing under the horizon of my hood. I stood on the brakes, the cab and the trailer behind hopping. I remember just thinking, Jesus, Jesus, oh Jesus. I hopped out of the cab, I don't remember turning on the flashers, and ran back behind the truck. I saw him walking back up the hill, behind my truck, hands in his jacket pockets, his back illuminated by my red lights. He looked back at me, his black eyes and black mouth now grinning toothlessly. Then he dashed into the trees at the edge of the road. I was so scared, I didn't call out. I just got in my cab and drove on. I still dream about those wide eyes and that unholy mouth disappearing under my hood. I hope the dreams stop now.